Okay, well, Matthew Collings, art critic and channel organizers.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of innocence in the room, a bit of ignorance. But maybe it's asking a lot that something rather difficult, like art generally, should be capable of being immediately liked and immediately understood and immediately appreciated in all its depth and richness. That is not to say just conceptual art, which is a strand of art which has existed for about 100 years, but all of it. This thing that we call art, which is a collection of many, many things, which perform very many different functions, is not really worth having if it can be so easily grasped that one can feel confident in making an easy, simple definition of what it is. It's not even to mention conceptual art. The art that presumably those in the room who have many difficulty opposing emotion would think to be marvellous, like Michelangelo or Rembrandt, Piero del Francesco, or Gauguin, Van Gogh. All this art is very, very complicated, very, very nuanced, and requires a lot of thought. I'm not remotely saying that it is conceptual art. Of course it is. It's art which is mostly about forms, about combining forms in actually a very beautiful way. It may be that in the case of Gauguin, the forms are rather rough. In the case of Van Eyck, they're rather smooth. So the beauty in Gauguin is different to the beauty of Memling. Even to hold that contrast in your mind implies millions and millions of nuances, of contrast and difference between all the different types of pre-modern art, which tonight we're supposed to imagine somehow in their totality make redundant this thing that has become called conceptual art. Looking around the room, I see some paintings which are all done by, except for that one, by artists who are quite sympathetic and have a little bit of talent. This is quite a kitsch work, it isn't very, very good. even the nicest one, which I would say possibly this one has some quite nice muted colour, could not possibly be said to use your definition earlier of what art really is. To be emotional or beautiful, you'd want to grab it, so you have to return to it again and again. They perform a certain function for this room. You're talking about a sort of ideal of art, which is certainly true in many cases. Work by Piero would have no difficulty in saying it's quite emotional, it's quite beautiful, I would want to see it again and again. I wouldn't necessarily say a lot of work of the 20th century is necessarily devoted to emotion, but it might be quite beautiful. A lot of abstract art is beautiful. It's not necessarily all that emotional. I wouldn't say that Mondrian was particularly emotional. And I wouldn't say that Cubism, in its early days, is the emotional kind of art, although it can be moving in a way. But the way in which we are moved by abstract forms is quite complicated. To expect it to make any sense, to say we're suddenly gripped by emotion, is to misunderstand what goes on. When we see a Rembrandt, for example, you can sum up in your mind an image of an aging man peering out at this brown ground, someone who is staring out at us 400 years ago. You see two things: an amazingly rendered face, done with amazing skill. And we also see the process of aging. We're moved by that. It is quite an emotional experience. In a way, Rembrandt is kind of the quintessence of what you're trying to get when you summon up an idea about what art should be. This business of what it should be is not necessarily what it is. And to find out what it is does involve, as Adrian said in his talk, doing a bit of work. And that work is partly to do with simply going to a bit more exhibitions, and some of you in this room, it seems, go to, reading a bit more books, and informing yourself a bit more about history of art, and the complexities of art. Now, I don't stand for conceptual art. It's not, I'm not Mr. Conceptual art. I went to art school in the 1970s because I thought that, when I was about 17 or 18, I thought that for a couple of years now, I've been looking at new artworks and finding works by the artists that I've mentioned now, these pre-modern artists and artists at the new period of modern art, to be rather amazing. I wonder how they do that. And possessing a little bit of drawing talent myself, I try and find out how to do it by going to art schools. It took me another year or so to get here. When I was I happened to find myself in art school in the mid-70s. The dominant art at that time, the art everyone was in awe of and rather intimidated by, was conceptual art. I never thought I wanted to make conceptual art, but I was extremely influenced, and I still am today, by two aspects of the kind of chat that conceptual artists seem to go in for. I wasn't intellectually equipped to be able to read great treatises on conceptual art, but one could read interviews, and occasionally one would come around to the school and give you a lecture. What I noticed is that they were quite sceptical, and also they were rather bravely daring, wanting to try things out. Another aspect of sort of tone of the conceptual artist chat was irony. They were quite funny, clever, and thoughtful about the things they wanted to target with their scepticism. At that time, their target was a sort of institutionalization of abstract art, whereby abstract art, painting of stripes, use of drips, the use of large scale, use of bright colours, sort of type of art that gives you no narrative whatsoever, a sort of very rich visual experience of forms and textures and colours. That art had become a kind of academy. It was the job of conceptual art in the 60s and 70s to, as it were, destroy it and to question it profoundly, to undermine it and subvert it. Now, at that time, I didn't really find either of the forms, either the types of art, very sympathetic. I felt alienated from abstract art because I didn't know how to understand it. And I felt alienated from the objects that conceptual artists came up with because they seemed too difficult. They easily conformed to sort of rather childish caricatures and descriptions of conceptual art that come up this evening, and perhaps even more outrageous than some of them. Since then, I haven't particularly changed in my views. I don't particularly think that conceptual art is the greatest art that's ever been. I think the period that we're in is sort of a rather sort of shallow pop version of conceptual art, just as Mark said. And in fact, I appreciated the historical view that Mark was trying to take, noticing that there were periods of conceptual art, from its initial origins with Deuchar, the 1960s sort of New York-based version of conceptual art that I'm now talking about, that I experienced in the 70s, and the present-day pop version. I haven't changed my opinion of conceptual art. On the whole, I'm still moved by the same type of art I was moved by when I first went to art school. But I did learn to think and to learn to organise my thoughts from the tools that were given to me by the talk of conceptual artists. And as I say, it seemed to me that scepticism and daring and a certain amount of irony were important and still are.